FlightDeck is the best EPUB testing tool that's available in the market. One of the great things about FlightDeck is that it goes deeper and further than you can get with the standard quality assurance tools that are out there and that are available. Most notably, EpubCheck. So if you're familiar with ebook development at all, you know that EpubCheck is the industry standard tool for testing ebook files. And if you take an ebook file that you've created, whether it's out of InDesign or something else, and you run it through EpubCheck, you'll usually have to do it inside of some sort of terminal or command prompt. And this is an example of a file that's being run through the EpubCheck tool inside a command prompt here in Windows. You can also run it through a couple of other options. There's a free tool called Pagina EpubChecker that kind of gives this a visual GUI interface. And then there's obviously an uploader at the IDPF website as well. So the thing about this EpubCheck tool is that it's really not intended for kind of the common man. Usually the results are, as you can see, sometimes kind of obtuse and not necessarily easy to understand. And it can make a little bit of a difference if you're not really sure what you're looking at, if you had the file, ebook file created by an outside source of some kind, a vendor or something like that, and you're just not sure how to fix those issues that might come up. So the good thing about FlightDeck is that you can run it through the same test that you would run it through here. We actually use the EpubCheck tester as part of the tool set within FlightDeck. But it goes a lot deeper than that. So I'm going to take the same file. I'm going to go to the FlightDeck interface, and I'm going to actually run that same file through the FlightDeck tool. So as you can see, you can drag and drop a file into the upload section here on FlightDeck. The system will automatically upload the file for you. It'll tell you a status as it's uploading. So if it's a very large file, then you can upload that without any trouble. You can upload any file up to 750 megabytes. So if you're doing fixed layout or a very heavily illustrated book, that's not a problem. And if for some reason you have a file that's larger than 750 megabytes, just let us know and we can see if we can get it in the system for you for testing as well. So as the file gets uploaded, the system starts to validate and test the file and go through a set of validation system tools. So the first thing obviously is the EpubCheck tool. We run the file through EpubCheck, and then we take the results from EpubCheck and figure out what the actual difficulty or the problem might be. So in a lot of cases, EpubCheck will give you just error spam, like we saw in that file we ran a moment ago. But the great thing about FlightDeck is that in addition to giving you actually the right error messages, it'll kind of reduce it down to what are the real key issues. So in this case, there was actually just one issue that was the problem in that file. You're missing a closing P tag. So FlightDeck will figure out what that problem is, and then it tells you where in the file to go to make the change in your EPUB. So this is a pretty common issue inside EpubCheck, is just not understanding what the rules are. And what we tried to do is make it a little bit more interesting, more understandable, help you understand things better than you might see otherwise. You'll also notice that there are some other things we test. There are some things that EpubCheck doesn't test. In most cases, that ends up being best practices and issues with the retailers that you'll be sending your file to. So I'd like to switch over from our validation report over to the best practices report. Now, the best practices report shows you what we consider to be best practices based on what the Book Industry Study Group has said, what the IDPF and now the W3C has said about best practices, and based on many years of developing ebooks ourselves and knowing what's going to work and what's not going to work and how to make a high quality ebook file. So these best practices are not tested by EpubCheck. There's not any other tool in the market that tests for all of these. And the system will go through and check and see if, for instance, if you have a guide section or a landmark section in your EPUB. It'll look for inline styles and warn you about those so that you can separate your content and your presentation into two different places, both the HTML and CSS. And it'll give you other warnings and other information about other things, if there are URLs that are in the text of the book that aren't linked, or if there are other things that might be potentially problematic for your readers that'll make the reading experience not quite as good as it could be. So best practices are kind of general practices that we would recommend you take care of and fix inside the file. The retailer grid is really kind of where the rubber meets the road for a lot of publishers. What we did when we developed FlightDeck was we went to the major retailers and we said, so what do you do to test an EPUB file when it comes to you? Are you running it through your own tool of some kind? Do you have a list of things that you check before you put the file up for sale? What kind of issues will a publisher run into or an author run into if they're trying to upload a file and get it up for sale? So in a couple of cases, specifically Apple and Amazon, they actually have automated tools that they run every book through. So Apple uses a tool called Transporter. Amazon uses their Kindle Gen tool. And so what we did was we took those tools and integrated them into FlightDeck to run the testing for you. And then in addition to that, added on top of it additional tests that we know are also going to be potentially problems that you might run into. So for Apple, for instance, we're looking for any links to the Amazon website or Barnes & Noble website because we know that Apple has rejected books in the past that have links to outside retailers of other kinds. So we're looking for things like that they won't necessarily test themselves or tell you about until sometime further down the road, and warning you about that in advance. Now I'm going to switch out from this title that we've been looking at and go back to my files page real quick. And I'm going to go into the retailer acceptance grid for a book that passes all of these checks, just so you can see that it is completely possible to get a 100% score in FlightDeck, to be able to have every single test passed completely. So for the retailers that don't have their own testing tool, we've gone through their documentation and the information that they provided to us about what they're looking for and what they think makes a good quality tool and a good quality ebook. And we've created our own validation rules, our own validation tests for each of those. So if Barnes & Noble, Google, and Kobo, we actually go through the file and make sure that the file is set up properly and follows their recommended practices. If there's anything in there that's potentially a problem or could run into an issue, we're going to either warn you about it or give you some information about it. So there's going to be things that you'll run into, like in this instance, Kobo recommends not having more than 3 megabytes of image content in a single HTML file. It's just a recommendation. It's not an actual requirement, so it's just marked as an info box instead of as a warning or an error message. But this allows you to catch those issues that you might run into and fix them before you run into problems on the retailer websites as you're uploading, or on the retailer devices as you're doing testing. We also, of course, because NetGalley is part of the Firebrand family, we also test EPUB files for validity with NetGalley. This is really helpful if you are in the early stages of your publishing process and you want to send a file to reviewers through the NetGalley platform. But it's an earlier release file. A lot of times, you don't have the final EPUB ready to go at the time you're going to do NetGalley, but you do have an EPUB you can export kind of quick and dirty from InDesign or something like that. So you can test that file here in FlightDeck, make sure that it's got all the basic necessary requirements for NetGalley, so that you won't run into problems with their system when you're loading that file into the NetGalley system. And then of course you can come back later when you have your final EPUB and run it through the test again to ensure that it meets all of the requirements for these other retailers as necessary. In addition to validation and best practices in the retailer grid, we also have a stats document. This report gives you some basic information about the book. Some of it is actionable, some of it is not. The most actionable information here is the links. So we actually give you a list of all of the external links in the book, and then you can click on those here and be taken to those websites. So if you wanted to go take a look at the eBook Architect's website, you could do that from here. If the link is broken, so let's say for instance you're doing a nonfiction title, has a lot of links in the endnotes, and you find that a couple of those pages, those web pages are no longer active or something else is wrong, then you can click on this link to show you where all of those hyperlinks are in the EPUB file, so you can go and make changes to them, either unlink them or correct the link to point to the right place. We also give you information about what fonts are embedded in the file, some characteristics about the file itself, so you can see what file sizes take up the most of the content. So in this case, the JPEG images and the fonts are kind of taking up the bulk of the file size. And then we show you both a list of the largest files in the document, in the EPUB, and a list of all of the images in a table that you can then sort. And this is really helpful if you're trying to figure out how can I take the size of my EPUB. And let's say my EPUB file is 40 megabytes, and that's too big for it to be accepted by certain retailers. So I need to reduce the size of that EPUB. What can I do to do that? Well, usually images end up being one of the bigger problems in very large EPUB files. So what we've done is given you this table, and you can sort it based on file size, or you can sort it based on pixel count. This is a big deal for Apple. Apple has a requirement that you not have any image files that are larger than 4 million pixels, which is the width times the height. So this pixel count can help you keep underneath that, in addition to the error message that you would see on the Apple retailer grid test. So you can sort this by file size, for instance, and then go through and change the size, reduce the size of the larger images to get that total size of your EPUB down to a more manageable size. You can also catch other issues. So if most of your images or all of your images are supposed to be within a certain pixel range, be a certain size, because you know that that'll fit better onto the EPUB screens or reading device screens and look better on different devices, you might notice, oh my goodness, this image is too small. It's supposed to be larger. I should go and fix that. There's other information in here as well. I'll give you a list of all of the header levels that are used inside the book. So if you notice that your complex nonfiction title has only level 1 headers, you probably have some problem in the HTML code. You might want to go look and see, why do we not have H2s in our code? Because more than likely you'll have some sort of subsection level heading that needs to be marked in H2. And then we show you the table of contents so that you can just have a copy of the table of contents to use in your documentation or anything else. Make sure it works properly. So that's the stats report. In addition, we have a metadata editing tool built into FlightDeck. Now, this metadata editor is only for the metadata that's for the EPUB itself. It's only within the EPUB file. This doesn't go into your Onyx feed or have any connection to your Onyx information in title management. But it is helpful if you're going to be selling this book directly on your own website, or you want to make sure that the metadata is correct. You can go into the editor here and make any changes that you want. If you, say, for instance, add a subtitle and maybe you change the author, add an author or an illustrator to the creators list or things like that. Once you've made all those changes, you can save it and then run the file through the reprocessing engine that'll reprocess it and make sure it goes through all the tests again to ensure that you didn't break something. So if you had added you wrote the ISBN incorrectly and it's only 12 digits or something like that, the system would recognize that and warn you about it as well. Then once you're done making those changes, you can download that EPUB file again from the system and be able to use that as your final EPUB file. So FlightDeck is built to recognize both EPUB 2 and EPUB 3. It is able to understand the differences between the two, and also fixed layout and reflowable, and the differences between those two as well. So if you upload an EPUB 2 file that is really complex and you're worried about how it might work on different reading platforms, it's gonna test it in here just as well as it would EPUB 3. If you're doing fixed layout, nowadays fixed layout is pretty much all done in EPUB 3. So that's my recommendation typically if you're doing fixed layout, is to go with EPUB 3, and it'll test that and give you results and test results, information about that based on the fact that you're looking at an EPUB 3 fixed layout document. Each of the different reports inside FlightDeck can be downloaded individually. So if I'm looking at my validation report and there's some issues here that I need to give to my vendor to make them aware of those problems, I can download that file directly from here. Just click on the link to get that report. It'll create a PDF for me and download that to my computer. Or if I want to, I can go to the files page and download a combined report for all of those messages and reports in one place. So I can click on Get Combined Report. That'll give me all of the error messages, everything from all of the different reports in this one PDF file that I can then send off to my vendor or give to someone else if I need to. You can also re-upload files. So the way the system works in FlightDeck is that it's a subscription system. So you can subscribe to either 5 titles a month or 25 titles a month, or if you have a much larger number of titles you're producing, we can give you a special subscription price. When you're the way the subscription works, though, is that you have your 5 titles. If you upload, say, you upload your EPUB file and you see that there are some issues, so you go and you fix those issues, and you want to come back and retest it, it's not hard to do that, but you do need to make sure you do it from the re-upload system. So there's a re-upload file link on all of these pages. If you click on that, it'll take you into that title and show you a new upload file location, so you can drop the file here and re-upload it. That'll go through the same upload process and testing process that you did before, but it won't count against you for your title count for the month. So if you've only got the 5 titles a month title count, then you want to make sure you re-upload the files that you're testing a second or third or whatever time. Another important point to make as well is that if you have a subscription to FlightDeck and you've tested your file or files, let's say you're a small publisher, you've got about 5 titles that you wanted to test. Once you're done with the subscription, if you wanted to, you can cancel it at any time. So if you've tested the 5 titles you want to test right now, you won't have some more until 3 or 4 months later. You can go ahead and cancel that subscription. Your account will stay in place, and the files and the tests that you have in the system will also stay in place. So if you need to come back a couple weeks later, make some changes to the files and re-upload them to test them, you can still do that for titles that you have already tested in the system. So it makes it easy for you to manage your subscription separate from the actual access to FlightDeck, and to have access to all of those tests that you've had in the system in the past. Another great thing about FlightDeck being part of the Firebrand family is that if you're a Firebrand customer, you can actually access FlightDeck from within the title management system, assuming that you are an Eloquence On Demand Elite customer. Eloquence On Demand Elite customers actually get FlightDeck as a free subscription service, so they can upload as many files as they want into FlightDeck. It's a free part of their subscription to Eloquence On Demand Elite. And so if you're an elite customer and you want to do that, we're more than happy to set you up with a FlightDeck account and give you free access to upload as many titles as you want into the system. There's a really straightforward interface here in title management. So I'm going to scroll up again. So we're on a title summary page for the Book of Texas. This is a title we have in our demo system. And if I scroll down, there's a FlightDeck section in here that shows all of the history of the times that I've uploaded this file into the FlightDeck system and tested it. So the difference here, and what's important to note, is that FlightDeck within title management is connected directly to the FlightDeck system and with your account. So you don't have to log into FlightDeck or anything. You just log into title management. You come right here, and when you're ready to upload a file, you click on the Open FlightDeck link there, and it takes you to the FlightDeck website. And you'll notice that it's asking me to upload an EPUB file for the Book of Texas. So it knows that I'm loading this file specifically for the Book of Texas, and I want to make sure that that's the one that gets uploaded. So I'm going to take that EPUB file and drop it in here, let it do its upload. Once the upload is complete, the system is processing it in the background. And so I don't have to actually stay on this page. I can actually close this window if I want. And it'll process in the background. I can go back to title management, keep on working on my metadata, doing other things in the system. And then once it's complete, if I give it a couple of minutes, I can hit this little refresh button. And that refresh button will tell me, will show me on the list here if that file has been completed. So you'll notice that today's May 10th, and so I've got my file that I uploaded this time. It shows me that EpubCheck has completed and best practices has completed, but I've got question marks on the other ones showing that they're not complete. So if we give it just another minute or two, it should complete the rest of those tests, and then we can hit the refresh button again, and it'll show us the results of all of those tests as well as it's going through. Once I've finished making all of the changes that I want to my EPUBs, or I've uploaded the files that I want, if I come back here at any time and I want to see what the history was, obviously you've got the history right here visible, but I can also go in and click on any of these messages to be able to see what the messages were. So if I see that there was an error message here for this Book of Texas file, I can click on that, open it up, and see a history of what that problem was. I can see that the NCX file was missing in this EPUB3 file, which would make it a problem for Barnes & Noble. So that's a really helpful feature if you're trying to track, okay, so did we fix those issues in the file or did we not, and what kind of issues might we be running into right now? So that's how FlightDeck works. That's kind of the main feature set. I would like to point out one more thing. I'm going to click through again to my title here in FlightDeck and show you that we have a handbook. The handbook is available on the internet for anyone. It's not just even for FlightDeck customers. If you have questions about EPUB, there's some good information in here about how to do certain things, like adding fallbacks or embedding fonts in your file, adding a guide or a landmark section to your EPUB. There's a lot of good information in here, and there are also quite a few resources and tools that we point people to that should help you with your ebook development. So if you have ideas for any of these that you wanted to go look at, you could look at like the BISG EPUB 3 support grid or other information about EPUB and ebook development. Thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation about FlightDeck. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us at askbernie@firebrandtech.com.